So this is the agenda. We'll be together about 15, 16 weeks. So today and this week mostly will be introducing the course, introducing the assignments, the projects, the grading and whatnot, and what's expected of you in this course. We'll start actual content of the material at the end of this lecture and next Friday. We'll start talking about HTML and CSS as a mechanism for creating static content. HTML is the main language for laying out the content of the page, whereas CSS for styling it and giving it the different look and feel. Next week we'll do some we'll finish off CSS and styling, and we'll talk about responsive design to build applications so that they can adapt to the size of the screen, so that so it's usable in regardless of how big your monitor is or how small your mobile phone might be. Then we do have on the third week we have a couple of holidays throughout, but they don't affect us. They're mostly on Mondays, so that shouldn't be a problem. So we're meeting on Tuesdays and Fridays. So the first 2 weeks is mostly looking at creating static content, even though the assignment are going to be building things that eventually will be dynamic, right? We won't have JavaScript or any way to program a lot of these dynamic stuff until our third week, right? So, but nevertheless, we'll be creating the groundwork for preparing ourselves for creating the content that eventually will be dynamic, okay? So that will be the first assignment, creating a static content. But later on, we'll come back on the third week and start making that content a little bit dynamic. And we'll do that introducing JavaScript. It's the programming language of browsers that allow us to control browsers, handle any events that the user might be generating as a click and drag and type and whatnot, and then taking actions based on those events that the user generates. We'll take a look at just plain old JavaScript, and then introduce some of the newer features of the latest version of the language, ES6. Pretty exciting new features. We will talk about jQuery as one of the more popular libraries out there that's widely used for interacting with the browser. JavaScript, because of the wars between the different browsers and the different vendors and the different versions, it has fractured the language into multiple versions with all small little idiosyncrasies, depending on what version the browser is, depending what version of JavaScript is being supported. And this makes it so much more complicated to build web applications on the front end, yes? So jQuery solved this problem by providing a small sliver of abstraction, right, that allows us to code to this abstraction as opposed to having to know how each browser works, right? So we code to this standard. Then in the fourth week and on, we'll have now we will know enough JavaScript to identify that hey, we're building real applications here. They can be fairly complex, and so we will borrow a lot of ideas that had matured over several decades on the server side that work very well building large enterprise applications. We'll grab a lot of those ideas that are very, very mature, and we will apply them on the client side, right? So things such as model view controller, single thread patterns, data access objects, inversion of control. All these are design patterns and best practices that originated in several decades of maturing in Java, C#, running on the server side and desktop applications, right? And they have been trickling over onto client-side applications since they are becoming more and more complex, right? And we have to deal with this complexity, and these best practices are going to help us. So the first one is we're going to introduce React.js, which is a component-based web framework that allows us to build complex, large applications in terms of reusable modular components, right? And we're going to be using a strategy called the single page application, which has become the modern technique of how we build front-end applications. It used to be that dynamic content was rendered on the server side. It was very common for throughout a decade or so. But ever since JavaScript has become more and more powerful, we now typically render dynamic content on the front end, on the browser, as opposed to on the server, and it has become the de facto standard. So we'll talk about single page applications and how React implements that design pattern. We'll run into some challenges in React.js, in particular how to maintain state in the application. As a user interacts with the application, it makes the application transition from one state to the other, and we need to maintain the state of the application. And it's fairly challenging with using just plain old React.js. And one of the more popular ways of maintaining state in the application is Redux. Redux specifically for React. So the combination of React and Redux has become very, very popular in the industry as a means of maintaining state and propagating state across the entire application. So we'll spend a couple of weeks there. Up to this point, up to week 5, we won't have any place to store any data whatsoever, right? So everything will be dynamic, but there is no way to store the state application state anywhere. We'll need a place to store it somewhere. So we'll introduce REST as a mechanism to talk and send data back to the server, saying, "Hey, server, this is my current state of the application. Please store it somewhere so that I can, if there's a server, if there's a client refresh, or if I crash, I can always go back and find my current state." So REST is, again, a very, very popular industry standard for sharing data across the network from client to the server and exposing data models to the client so that you can access them through HTTP. Again, another holiday that doesn't affect us. Then on week 7, we'll stay on the server side and look at strategies of storing data, permanent data, in permanent storage in a database, right? So we'll use Java to interact with MySQL, and we'll create some data models. We'll be able to store this data in permanent storage in a relational database in MySQL using Java's persistence API and the object relational mapping design pattern. Okay. So that pretty much takes us to the 8th week, which will have a midterm right before the spring break. On week on the 8th week on Tuesday we'll excuse me, we'll build a small prototype. Now that we know enough to be dangerous. We have the front end, we have the middle tier, we have the database. We'll at least the first stack. We'll have completed our first stack, right? The React for the front end, Java for the middle tier, MySQL for the database. We've completed the first stack. We'll build a prototype of what might be a project, right? And we'll ask you to do the same, right? Now that we've shown here in class a lecture of how to build a prototype of what a project might look like, go on your own, build a prototype of the minimum value product, right, might be for your particular project. Okay. Then we'll have our spring break, and we can pause for a bit, and we'll be ready to look at our second tier, our second framework. So for our second framework, when we come back, again, it's the mean stack. So mean is an acronym, stands for M for Mongo, E for Express, A for Angular, and N for Node.js. So we'll take a look at all these 4 different technologies. We'll start with Angular. Angular is Google's component technology for building user interfaces. It has a much higher, steeper learning curve than React, but that's okay because we'll have already understood what single page applications are. We will know already what component technologies are. We already know what SPAs are. We'll know how navigation works, how state management works. So all those things will make it easier to get into Angular, right? That's why I left Angular for the second half. It has a much steeper learning curve. But by then we'll know a lot of the things that will be second hand to us. We'll spend a week and a half or so in Angular. It will then introduce Node and Express, the N and the E in mean, for creating RESTful services. Again, to create a server, the middle tier, so that the front end can send data to the middle tier, right? And process that data, and then store it in a database, the Mongo database, that we'll take a look at starting week 12, the 12th week, and the 13th week, which is a non-relational database, right? That it's more of an object database as opposed to a relational database, and we'll see the differences between the two. Let's see, some design patterns for the last week. We'll probably either use it for finishing up and helping out on whatever you have been working through the project. My expectation is that somewhere in the middle of the semester you should be know enough that you can start working on your project, and you'll have a full month and a half to work on your project with your teammates. You'll have already perhaps done some design. Perhaps you've done maybe a little bit of prototyping. You've done some research to in earnest start working by the middle of the semester. So by now, the week number 14, that's I would assume that you're just cleaning up, doing some less final testing, and verifying that things are working. But the TAs and myself will make ourselves available for giving you a hand to get you that last mile. Or if everybody's good and everybody feels confident, we might use it for other things. Maybe we can talk about Vue.js, or talk about GraphQL or some other exciting technologies. Okay. So the schedule for the undergraduate and graduate is slightly different. Our last day that we meet is the 14th, I believe. That Tuesday is the last day that we meet, so that will be the final exam. Okay. Whereas the graduates, I guess they have an extra day. Their last day is on Friday, so their final exam will be that Friday. Then we have Patriots Day on Monday after that, and the project is due that following Tuesday, right after Patriots Day, and so that's going to give the TAs and myself about a week worth of time to grade all the projects. So that week, that's week number 16. The TAs and myself are going to be pretty busy and unavailable. We're going to be grading lots and lots of projects through our. I think we have 3 different sections. So we're going to be a lot of projects to grade. So we're not going to be available if you run into problems and you need help. Please try to bring that as early as possible. Grades are due the following Monday, the 27th. So we have that week to finish off any grading. Okay. All right.